guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today I have my November wrap up. So in the month of November, I did not do too well. I actually did worse than I did in October in terms of the amount of pages read. However, my average page, I think, for the month, as you will see in the stats coming soon, is slightly higher than last month because there is one less day in November than October. But November was just not a good month. I participated in the Believathon. I did manage to read my one book a week, or an equivalent of one book a week, because I read 4 books for Believathon, and then I read one adult book and one adult thing that wasn't a book, which you will see when we get to it. So I wasn't too bothered. I knew that I was going to fail November's Bookopoly anyway, and I've just been really busy. You know, things were looking a lot better for me and I would have more free time for reading, and then I ran a sale on my Kindle website, which yeah, I'm still trying to get through those orders, guys. It's a lot. It's a lot, and that really set me back reading wise. However, I'm not mad about the amount of books that I've read. The only thing that I'm mad about, I'm not mad, is that I was on track to hit at least 100 books this year, and because of my 2 very poor reading months, I have to read 6 books in December, absolute minimum, to be able to hit that. My Goodreads goal for the year was 90 books, which I have hit. I'm currently on 94, but I do need to read 6 books this month to make it to 100. But aside from that, I don't really have anything to say about November. I was just really busy, nothing exciting happened, so we're just gonna get straight into the stats. So in the month of November, I read 1,930 pages, which broke down to an average of 64.3 pages per day. For my star ratings, most of the books that I read were very highly rated. I read 1 3-star book, 1 4-star book, and 4 5-star books. For the demographics, I read 4 children's books because of the Believathon and just 2 adult books, but as I said, one of those was not a book. And for the formats, I read 4 physical books, 1 ebook, and 1 thing that I'm categorizing as a novella, but it was actually a deleted scene, shall we say. For the genres, I read 5 fantasy and 1 classic, and the 1 classic that I read was a classic fantasy. So this is a completely 1 genre month pretty much, and I don't think that's ever happened before. And then lastly, for the places where I sourced these books from, 3 of the books that I read in November I have hauled in 2019. 2 of them were from my own TBR that existed before the start of 2019, and 1 of these books I read on Scribd. So getting straight into the books that I read in November, the first book that I completed was Frostheart by Jamie Littler. This was the group book for Believathon, so of course this is a children's book. This is a children's fantasy that follows a young boy called Ash who lives in a settlement in a very snowy landscape. Now Ash's parents are something called pathfinders, which means that they do travel between all of the settlements. However, they did leave Ash behind, so he is kind of passed between various families and nobody really wants to look after him. And eventually he does end up in the care of a yeti, which none of them are too happy about. Now Ash has a big secret, and that is that he has the urge to sing whenever something is going wrong. And in this world, everybody fears people who have the ability to sing or are something called a song weaver, which Ash discovers he is. Now in the frozen landscape, we do have monsters called leviathans who also sing. So the reason that the people fear song weavers is because they think that anybody who can sing and can understand the song of the leviathans is susceptible to being brainwashed by the leviathans and then working against the settlements. So one day Ash does see somebody in trouble and he does start to sing. This gets him exiled from the community that he lives in, and he finds himself on board a snow sleigh called the Frostheart, where he then begins the voyage to find his parents who left him quite a while ago and went missing and never returned. So I gave this book 4 stars. I did really enjoy it. It does have illustrations, and I have to admit, one of my favorite things about this story was the illustrations. I believe that this book is both written and illustrated by Jamie Littler, so Jamie Littler is a very talented man, and there were many things that I did really enjoy about this story and just a couple of things that I wasn't a huge fan of. So when I went into this, I did not know that this was going to be the first book in a series, and because it is the first book in a series, the book kind of leads off halfway halfway through the story arc, I feel. And I did expect him to accomplish his mission in this book, but it seems that this series is going to be kind of one long plot line to find Ash's parents, and it is kind of about all the things that happen along the way. Now, this is quite a large book for a children's book. It is 450-ish pages, and I did feel like it did take a while to get going. That synopsis that I just gave you is essentially just an elaborate version of what it says on the back. But if we talk about that in terms of how long that happens in the book, you are 150 pages into the book before you complete the bit that is detailed in the synopsis. So that is my main complaint about it, that it felt a little bit slow to get started, but I did really enjoy a lot of the characters in here. I do really like Ash. He does this thing that all kids do where they think they know better than adults, which as an adult that annoyed me a little bit, but I do also realize that I'm not the target audience for this book, so that isn't something that I deducted stars for. It is just something I noticed while I was reading it. I do also really like Tobu, who is the Yeti figure. Some people make out that he's really scary, but he's just a big fairy sweetheart. And then we also have Luna, who is Ash's friend that he makes on board the Frost Hearts, and she is just sassy and snarky, and anything that Ash says she has an answer for, which I love because that was pretty much me as a child. And then the one other little niggly thing that I had is that the writing in some places did resemble modern speech. So obviously this is a fantasy setting or a possible dystopian setting, but a lot of the writing would mimic modern speech and kind of modern phrases, which as a fantasy reader that is a little bit jarring. Like I said, I gave this 4 stars. I thought it was magical and it had its heartwarming moments, and I will be picking up the sequel to this. The second book I completed was A Dance with Dragons Part 1, Dreams and Dust by George R.R. Martin. This is the first half of the 5th book in the A Song of Ice and Fire series, which is the epic adult high fantasy series that the TV show Game of Thrones is based on. You guys probably know I am hosting a read-along for this entire series. I have been for the entirety of this year. This is the last book, or the first half of the last book, and the live show for this, if you are waiting for it, will be on the 16th of December on my channel at 8 PM GMT, which I believe is 3 PM EST, but please do check those times first because I'm really bad at conversions. If you are unfamiliar with the plot of this series, it is really hard to describe without spoiling a big event that happens at the end of the first book, but this is a multi-perspective fantasy book, and the main focus follows the most powerful families in Westeros fighting over control of the Iron Throne and the country. So I can't really review this as a book because it is the first half of a bigger book, but so this first half of A Dance with Dragons has been my favorite installment in the series so far. A Song of Ice and Fire overall is a political fantasy. As I said, we are predominantly following people who are trying to gain control of the kingdom, so it is a lot of scheming and war strategy and a few battle scenes, but there are elements of fantasy in this series. We have dragons, we have wights, we have wargs, there's a fire god, there's Lady Stoneheart, if you know who she is, and whatever her deal is. So we do have magical elements in here, but they definitely take a back seat for a lot of the series, while the political plot is at the forefront. Now, the thing that I like about A Dance with Dragons is that it runs simultaneously with the previous book in the series, which is A Feast for Crows. So the events in the 2 books are happening at the same time. However, A Feast for Crows does follow the political plotline of the series, while A Dance with Dragons follows all of the magic. Now, the magic is very, very interesting because the thing about George R.R. Martin's writing is that everything that he writes is kind of relevant. All of the myths and the lore and the legends are all there for a purpose, and it creates a really well developed world. And what you start to see when you read further in the series is that the prophecies and the myths and the fairy tales are actually relevant to what is happening. Some of them are not just legends, like the Whites, or by their other name the Others, are frequent characters in the tales that are used to scare children in this world. However, the Whites are very much real things, so I really liked seeing how all of the groundwork that George R.R. Martin has done in the earlier books with all of this myth and legend actually does play into the plot. And I liked picking up on the things that are happening in the plot in like real time in the series relates to the certain bits of legend or certain characters from legend in the series overall. So I did give this 5 stars. It is my favorite installment so far. I am around halfway through, just under halfway through the second half of this, and where I'm up to, the plot does start to converge. So the timeline of A Feast for Crows and the first half of Dance with Dragons has come back together, and it's not as interesting now because we have the mix of political and fantasy, while I really love just focusing on the fantasy. But I do think that Dance with Dragons overall will be my favourite book in the series. So the third book that I finished in November was another Believathon book, and that was Mary Poppins by P.L. Travers. Now this is the one that I have down for my classic read of the month because Mary Poppins was written in 1958. Now I am very familiar with Mary Poppins from the Disney movie, but I did not know that it was a book series until I watched Saving Mr. Banks. I'm so glad that the Believathon and Gavin gave me an excuse to pick this up because I absolutely loved it. Mary Poppins is a story that is very dear to my heart, and I connect it a lot with my mum because she introduced me to the movie, and I just had a really great time reading this book. So Mary Poppins does follow the magical nanny Mary Poppins and her time spent with the Banks family. One day Mary Poppins blows in on the easterly wind and she says that she will stay until the wind changes. Now the Banks children, there are 4 of them, there's only 2 in the movie, but the story does focus on the 2 eldest children, Jane and Michael, who are a little bit unruly. They've chased off quite a few nannies and they hate Mary Poppins to start off with, but they very quickly come around to her when they notice that not everything that she does is ordinary. So the thing that surprised me the most about this book is that it is not a linear narrative. There are 12 chapters in this book, but each chapter is a self-contained story. It is almost a collection of short stories, but we do have a beginning point where Mary Poppins arrives and also an end point where the wind changes. So every chapter does follow an adventure that the children have with Mary, some of which were classic scenes in the movie and some of which were completely new to me and I had no knowledge of. So overall I gave this 4.5 stars. If I'm being picky, I don't give half stars, so I did round it up to 5. But there were a lot of things I loved about this book. I love Mary Poppins as a character, and I think that Julie Andrews playing her in the movie was an absolutely excellent casting choice. One of the things that was great about Mary Poppins that I didn't expect is that she is very, very vain. Jane and Michael always comment on how she is looking at her reflection constantly in shop windows, which I just found really funny. Some of the classic scenes from the movie that are depicted in this book is the scene where she jumps into the painting with Burst, and there's the animated scene in the movie. There is also the bit where she goes to see her uncle and they're floating on the ceiling because of laughing gas. And we also have the bird woman in here that sits outside the bank, you know, with the song like Feed the Birds, Tuppence a Bag. I really love the writing style of this. It has a very whimsical writing style and I'm still trying to find a way to figure out how to describe this writing style. It's almost like a Once Upon a Time kind of thing. It's the kind of writing style that makes you feel like you are being told a story if this was read aloud, as opposed to a standard novel style. I just really can't describe it. I also found this very whimsical and I thought that it was just a perfect children's story. I would read this to children. I loved it so much, but I do also recognize that a part of my love for this is nostalgia. Now the reason that I gave it 4.5 instead of 5 is because I did enjoy the scenes that are depicted in the movie a lot more than I did the ones that I'm unfamiliar with, and that is because, like I said, this story, the character of Mary Poppins essentially just holds such a special place in my heart, and I very much closely connect those feelings with my mum. And while I did also enjoy the other stories, especially with this writing style, which I have now identified as my favorite writing style in children's books, I had a really great time with this. I just didn't enjoy those other stories as much as the ones that I was familiar with. But overall, I thoroughly enjoyed this and I'm excited to continue with the rest of the series. I then read another book for Believathon, and that was Castle in the Air by Diana Wynne Jones, and this is the sequel to Howl's Moving Castle, which is the book that the Ghibli movie was based on. Now I did read Howl's Moving Castle back in May, I believe, for the Ghibliathon, and I absolutely loved it. That is one of my favorite children's books of all time now. I was just blown away by that book, and one of the reasons is because I love Howl so damn much. Normally with the series I would tell you the plot of the series overall, but this series, I think the series is called The Land of Ingery, and each book does follow different characters, although some of the characters from the previous books do come into the books further in the series. So in Castle in the Air we follow a young man called Abdullah who is a carpet merchant, and he always has this wild dream that his father isn't his father, he's actually a long lost prince, and he's going to find a princess and whisk her away to marry him. Now he knows that this is a daydream. He also knows that he isn't adopted because he says he looks way too much like his father, but a man can dream. One day while he is in his carpet booth, a man approaches him and offers to sell him what he says is a magic carpet. Now obviously Abdullah is a little bit wary because anybody could come up with any old rug and say that the carpet is magic. They perform some tests and Abdullah is satisfied that the carpet is indeed magic, so he pays for it, and in his paranoia that he has done a bad deal and that the carpet is enchanted to just return to its owner in a certain period of time, he does go to sleep on the carpet to stop it from escaping in the night. However, things do not exactly go to plan because the magic carpet whisks him away in the middle of the night to the garden of the Sultan's daughter. Now Abdullah is completely taken by the Sultan's daughter and does plan to marry her. However, he does go back to visit her one night and finds out that she is missing, and this starts his adventure with his magic carpet to find his lost princess. Now there are many aspects of this story that I enjoyed. I gave it 4 stars, but there is also a couple of things that I just did not love as much as I did with Howl's Moving Castle. So one of the things that I absolutely love about both Howl's Moving Castle and Castle in the Air is the writing style. I love Diana Wynne-Jones' writing style. It is very much the same kind of style as Mary Poppins, but a whole lot more whimsical. I also think that there is a lot for adults in this book. To me, it seems like the classic book that is supposed to be read to a child, because while it is a children's story and children will gain a lot from it, it is also an adult story and the jokes are still funny and adults will pick up on things that children won't, which means that it is entertaining for both parties when reading. Now, as I said, the characters from earlier books do make appearances in the later books in this series, and Howl and Sophie were present in this book, not as I expected, as Jade warned me that they wouldn't be. And when I figured out what was going on with that, I loved that Howl and Sophie were back. But I think one of the things that I did love about the first book is Howl, and because Howl wasn't really in the second book and it wasn't about him, I just didn't love it as much. Now this book was written in the mid-90s and it shows a little bit because there are quite a few fatphobic comments in here. I still rate this 4 stars because it was written in the 90s. It's not excusable, but it did happen, and I don't feel like we can penalize authors for doing things that were okay in the time that they were doing them. But essentially there is a scene where Abdullah's family are trying to get him to get married because they want him to progress with his life or whatever, and they bring these twins to him who are fat, and it is constantly like hammered into you that these twins are fat. The way that Abdullah thinks about them is not okay. Anytime he describes anything about them, it is about how fat they are, and they're described as wearing like bright pink and bright yellow, so they seem like these comical characters, but there are other ways that they could have been made to be comical. I mean, being fat, not something to be laughed at, but in the 90s, it would have been okay to me for that time period if the fact that they were fat was one aspect of why Abdullah didn't want to marry them, but it was essentially the only reason. He kept thinking about this beautiful thin princess that he visits in the night, and he was disgusted by how fat these 2 girls were. So definitely not good to read. I was kind of shocked. I'm not fazed by things like this, and I'm not offended by things like this, especially, as I said, if they were written in a time where these things were okay, but it was really offensive. So if you do decide to pick up Castle in the Air, then do be wary of that. But I did enjoy this book overall. I will be continuing to the last book in the series, and I do want to read more from Diana Wynne-Jones. So the 5th thing that I read in November was the thing that isn't a book, and that was 3 by Jay Kristoff, which is a deleted scene from Dark Dawn. Now, you may have seen my vlog a couple of weeks ago where I was discussing how I just really wanted to read some really good fantasy romance, and I didn't have time to fit anything into my TBR. I was already currently reading things, so I wasn't in a position to pick up a new book, but I did have this deleted scene that I kept forgetting about that I still hadn't read, and so I read it. And I gave it 5 stars. I can't really tell you too much about this, and I'm not going to dwell on it because it is just something that you would only really read if you're a fan of the Nevernight series. But this is pretty much a chapter that was deleted that comes before a really big scene, like a big plot event in Dark Dawn, and it is smut. It is a smutty scene that was cut from the book because realistically these characters and this situation would never have worked. It just wouldn't have been plausible, so Jay cut it. But it is also pretty much what the fans wanted. I wanted this this is what we wanted. It never would have worked. I'm not salty that I wasn't given what I wanted, because Jay is right, it never would have worked. And if I'd have read this, I'd be like, okay, this is fan servicing. So I'm glad that it wasn't in the book, even though I would have loved it so much. But I'm also glad that Jay released this deleted scene and kind of let us know that it was a possibility, it was a thing that could have happened. I also kind of appreciate the fact that he did this fan servicey thing, like gave us what we wanted in glorious detail, because man can Jay Kristoff write a fucking good sex scene. But he did it outside of the book so that the plot of Dark Dawn still made sense and wasn't pandering to the fans. I mean, Dark Dawn did pander to the fans a little bit, and I think you'll know what I mean if you've read it. But yeah, this wouldn't have worked, but I'm glad it exists. And then the last book I read in November was my favourite book of the month, possibly. I really enjoyed this book, but it does have its flaws, and that is Northern Lights by Philip Pullman, which is the first book in his Dark Materials series. So this was another Believathon read, but this was a little bit different because this is a children's book, but it's also not a children's book. So the edition that I have especially, it is published by Scholastic, so it is very much aimed at children. But somebody in my comments did tell me that Philip Pullman has never specified an age range for this book, and I completely understand why, because there is just so much in here to appreciate. So the plot of this is that we follow Lyra, who is a young orphan. Her parents died in an airship crash, and she is in the custody of her uncle Asriel. However, Asriel is an explorer who is tied to the Jordan College in Oxford, and so he does leave Lyra in Oxford to be raised by the scholars while he goes to the north and does his research. Now, Lyra does enjoy living at Jordan College, but all she wants to do is go north with her uncle and explore and complete his research with him. She's very tenacious. She very much has an adventurous spirit, and she's always getting into mischief at the college. She climbs on the roofs, she causes havoc with the kitchen boy, and she's a very active child. Now, one day Lyra is exploring on a day that her uncle is due to come and present his current research to the college. She slips into a room that she shouldn't be in, and she sees the master of the college poisoning the wine that her uncle will soon be drinking. So she does warn her uncle, who tells her to hide and sit in on this presentation that he's about to give and watch the master for any suspicious behaviour. So Lyra does this, and in the presentation she discovers a substance called dust, which I'm still not sure what dust is. I haven't read this book, but it seems to be tied to the Aurora Borealis or the Northern Lights, and it also seems to be different in regards to adults and children with the amount of dust that is attracted to them. I don't know what dust is, so I don't know how to clear that up for you guys. Another unique aspect of this book is that every human has a demon, and a demon is an animal that I believe, well, it's not an animal, it's something that is connected to their soul, and it takes an animal form. When you're a child, your demon does constantly keep shifting shapes, but when you come to puberty and into adulthood, your demon will stop shifting and will take its final form. So one day Lyra is invited to dinner where she meets a female scholar called Mrs. Coulter, who invites Lyra to go and live with her and be her assistant. Lyra finds this woman very charismatic and very lovely, and pretty much is just taken by her and agrees to go and live with her. But she soon finds out that Mrs. Coulter may not be exactly what she seems. So this is a complex book, it's a complex plot. The things I liked about this, I really like the atmosphere, especially the Jordan College bits. The first section of this book I think was my favourite. However, my favourite character is Yorick Bernison, and I won't tell you about him because he comes in midway to quite late in the story, but he is my favourite character. I love him so much. I would die for Yorick Bernison. I did also really love the complexity of this story. It did take me by surprise because when I went into this, I did not know it was a book that was kind of across all age ranges, and it does really remind me of Harry Potter in that way, because when you hit book 3 or 4 of Harry Potter, it does become a book that can be appreciated by all ages, and this is very much the same thing. But when I went into this, I did not expect that, so all of the complexity of that plot really did take me by surprise, because this pretty much reads like an adult fantasy but with a children's adventure story plot. The one negative that I have to say about this is that the pacing is kind of off. This book is split into 3 parts. The first part is kind of all of the setup, and then in the second part the plot starts to happen, or like gets more fast-paced, shall we say. They're actually on the move doing something. And the second part does build up to a climax, and that part where it's building it up very much feels like we're coming to the resolution of the plot, where there's a big conflict and things happen and it's resolved, etc. But we still had like a whole third of the book left to go, so I felt like the way that the pace just climbed so much before dropping back into the rest of the book was a little bit off for me. And as well as that, I don't think that the actual climax of the story was as impactful as the climax of the second part of the book. Now, thinking about it now, quite a lot of stuff happens in that final climax, and it's a pretty big deal what's going down. But when I was reading it, just the pacing of the writing and the way the climax was built felt more like the end of the book in the second part than it did at the actual end of the novel. But overall, I did really love this. I would give it 5 stars just because I was blown away by the world and the complexity of the story. Would highly recommend this if you haven't read it already, and I will definitely be picking up the second book in this series at some point. So those are all the books that I read in November. Not too many, but I did enjoy the majority of them, which is great. I am determined to hit 100 books this year. I currently have 3 weeks, I have 2.5 weeks when you're watching this, left at work, and then I have 2 weeks off over the Christmas period, where I'm definitely planning on getting a lot of reading done. I will still be reading up until then, obviously, but I'm going to make it a priority to hit my goal in those 2 weeks if I haven't already. And I am one of those people who I don't just suddenly start reading graphic novels to hit my goal. I like to do it quite organically, because if I have to squeeze all these tiny books in to get to 100 books, then it's not really an achievement, because I could have spent January and February reading 100 graphic novels and hit it in no time. So yeah, I'm gonna knuckle down, I'm gonna focus on some reading, and I'm gonna hit 100 books. So that is it for this video. Please let me know if you have read any of these books and what you thought of them. And please also don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you want to. If you head to my description box, you will find a link to my Christmas iMac crowdfunder if you have enjoyed this video and would like to donate to that. You'll also find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram, and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish body butter and Kindle website, the Instagram for that, and 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.